I think we should define what neurodivergent even is. And neurodivergent is basically people whose brain works differently than normal people, right? And neurotypical is when your brain works like how everyone else's brain works, like you go through the same like thought processes typically to how other people's brain does. And neurodivergent people, their brain just works slightly different. They don't have the same connections. They don't work through things the same way, which is perfectly fine.
It's time to spill the beans with your host, Beans. Welcome to my podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to my podcast, Spill the Beans. It's me, Beans. Anyways, today we are going to be talking about a super important topic, and that is neurodivergency in witchcraft and spirituality, right? And I just want to start this one off by saying that there are a lot of people in witchcraft, in spirituality, who are neurodivergent, right? And this is just my own little thought process to this. Is I think that the reason why there are so many people who are neurodivergent in that is because, number one, neurodivergent people just don't do things, they don't do things that neurotypical people would, right? They do things differently, they have a different thought process, they have different coping mechanisms, and I think in trying to figure things out, neurodivergent people tend to gravitate towards spirituality and witchcraft more because it allows them to have more freedom. It allows them to have more freedom, more choices, and just really figure out their own explanations to things, ones that bring them more comfort, ones that bring them more peace, ones that make more sense to them. And I love that, right? I love that, honestly. What I also would like to say is a lot of neurodivergent people don't do things that neurotypical people normally would, right? Because their brain doesn't work the same way, their thought process don't. The moment that you don't fit inside the norm, the moment that you don't fit inside the nice little box that society has for you, society automatically outcasts you. It's a thing that happens so often. And society doesn't like to make accommodations for people who do things slightly different, for people who don't understand things the way that neurotypical people would, right? Like, they hate trying to make accommodations. The moment neurotypical people have to make accommodations for anyone, right, they get so butthurt. They get so upset. And that's just how that is. And that leads into, like, normally society hates disabled people. That's just a thing. Like, the disabled people get so much hate for no good reason. And it's the same thing in spirituality, in witchcraft. Because there is a typical norm for witchcraft, right? It's like, okay, there are some things that most people accept as like, this is what it's supposed to be. And the moment you fall outside of that, here's what it's supposed to be, the community starts to hate on you. They start to go, that's not how that's supposed to go. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're doing it wrong. When in reality, there are thousands of ways to do anything, right? Like, let's say you have arthritis. Let's say that you can't really shuffle cards like that because it hurts your hands. You could use, the machine like shuffler that spits out cards. You could use that to do tarot readings, right? Just put the cards in there, let it spit out the cards. And there's nothing that says that that's going to be any less accurate, right? Because sometimes people can't shuffle all that well. Sometimes it hurts them, and just like society hates making accommodation for people, the same goes for in witchcraft and in spirituality. The moment that you have to make accommodation, something that's easier for someone else, something that helps someone else more, the community just goes crazy. They go batshit wild for no good reason. Okay, like it's really famous now. It's more acceptable now. But there are decks of cards that have the meanings on the cards, right? Like beginner decks, which I think they're really helpful. I think they're really cool. But to this day, you'll still find people that are like, oh, if you do that, you're not really like doing it correctly. You're not really doing tarot. You're not really using your intuition. And they will tell you that it's wrong. And that's because that's not their norm. So the moment you introduce something that is here to accommodate someone else's need, so that way they can also be included in the craft, that you just get so much hate, right? And I think that's what neurodivergency is. It's creating accommodations for yourself so that way you can do things in the craft, right? Whether that be whatever. Because neurodivergent people, number one, a lot of ADHD people are in spirituality and witchcraft. And you just don't have the attention span like that. You just don't have the ability to plan, to be like, okay, I'm going to do this long, elaborate ritual, because you just don't plan, right? A lot of the times you do that stuff on a whim. You're like, oh, you know what I really want to do today? A spell. I wonder what I have, and then you run around and you're like, let me see what I have right now in this moment. Or you go and you spend the whole day getting everything. And then you're like, actually, nah, I don't feel like doing the spell anymore, right? So then you wait like another week and then you're like, right, got to do the spell now, you know? And so there are the people who are like, okay, you have to use the days of the week. You have to use like color correspondences, moon phase correspondences, all those things, which are great. Don't get me wrong. I love that, and I think it's very helpful, but it's not a necessity. It's not something that you have to do. And I think a lot of neurodivergent people like basically think of themselves as fake witches or like not good enough because they're unable to do the planning and the organizing. But you don't need to do the planning and organizing. One of my favorite things about witchcraft is the mundane of it all. Just the simple things you can add in your daily life to make things more magical. Like if you're drinking coffee, when you stir the coffee, you can stir it with intentions. It's super easy, super simple. Like one of my favorite cleansing methods is cleaning, because that's super simple, and just cleaning with the intention of getting rid of any negative energy, any unwanted things. It doesn't always have to be the most complex, most elaborate, most fanciest things. You can keep it simple and still be fairly magical and still be fairly spiritual. You don't have to do a said thing every day, right? Especially there's this really annoying thing about meditation. And first of all, I think meditation is great, right? I think it really helps to connect to yourself, to your intuition, to your spirit guides. This is not me knocking on meditation. My thing is when people say that you have to sit down, be still, no thoughts, meditate, right? Like it's the only type of meditation that's out there. It's not. Okay? There's mantra meditation where it's like, okay, you're repeating a said phrase over and over. And then there's active meditation where you're actively moving, because especially with people with ADHD, it's hard to sit down and be still. Like I find it hard to sit down and be still. It's just not for me. So one of my favorite ways to meditate is to walk. I will go on walks and meditate and receive messages that way, right? Sometimes when I'm shuffling cards, I meditate that way. You could do yoga and meditate. The only thing that you need to do during active meditation is be mindful, right? It's being like, okay, how does my body feel in this moment? What are the thoughts that I'm going through right now in this moment? You don't have to just sit there and be still and be like, okay, let me try and clear my thoughts, right? Because that's just so disabling, and so many people try and do that and they can't, and then they look at themselves as a failure because they can't do what people say that they should be doing. But like I said, there are so many different ways to do things. And I feel like it's important to know all of the different ways because it could be beneficial. You could be like, actually, this one way doesn't work for me the best, but something that is similar does. Another thing that really gets me about neurodivergency in witchcraft is for a good minute there, lots of neurodivergent people need medication. There are some people who aren't neurodivergent who need medication, right? But these medications are so that way you can live your normal life, so that way you can do what you need to do to help you. And for a good minute there was this thought process that if you take your medications, it lowers your vibrations, it lowers your frequency. You're not as spiritual, you're not as connected, like all of these things, which is just 100% not true. Okay, doing what you need to do to take care of your body to make sure you're doing well mentally, physically, and emotionally will never lower your vibration. And it's always going to help you, right? And so I absolutely hate that that was ever a thing that anyone ever thought, that doing something that was so important for you, taking medicine, taking medication, just wasn't good for you. On that same note, there was also a thought that if you raised your frequency high enough, right, if you became spiritual enough, then it would fix everything that was wrong with you. It would somehow cancel out the need to take medications. It would somehow cancel out the need to like go see a doctor, to like do anything, right? It'd be like, oh, obviously, all you have to do is raise your frequency high enough, and then everything that was ever wrong is going to be fixed. And that is 100% wrong. That's not how spirituality works, okay? First of all, this is a side note, but there's this thought process sometimes where it's like, okay, you raise your frequency and then you stay in that raised frequency forever, and that's wrong. You always go through this loop of, okay, we have a high vibrational frequency, we're opening our third eye, and then we can't stay in that place forever, right? Because when we raise our spiritual frequency, when we open our third eye, it makes us less grounded, right? It makes us less connected to reality. You can't really have both at the same time, like you can, but one is always going to overpower the other, So you have to come back down, ground yourself back in reality, have a low vibrational moment, and just take everything in. Okay. And that's how that goes. And then you go back and you raise your frequency again. You open your third eye, you connect with the divine, and then you come back down. And it's always that sort of roller coaster where you go, okay, it's open, it's closed. It's open and it's closed. And the reason for that is because obviously you're going to need to open your eye. You're going to need to raise your spiritual frequency to receive messages, right? To learn, to evaluate yourself, to just really take in who you're supposed to be, right? And then when you need to take action, when you're like, okay, I understand the information, now I have to put in the groundwork. Now I have to do the action part of it. Now I have to heal. Now I have to work on myself. Now I have to put in the work to make what I want to make happen, right? That's when you come back down, because that's where that happens. It happens in that lower state, in that grounded state, You can't really have a whole bunch of action in that higher state. That is why there's that constant thing of you go up and you go down. So the thought process that if you raise your spiritual frequency high enough, everything will just be eliminated is wrong, because you're not supposed to stay there. You're not supposed to always be in that high frequency. That's how you get anxiety. That's how you get disillusioned. That's how you start to dip into psychosis, you know? And it's just not healthy for you to try and stay in one of either of these states for too long, right? Because if you stay in that grounded low state, then you're never growing, right? You're never like, okay, let me learn something new. Let me get these messages from my spirit guide. You're never elevating yourself, to the next step. This is the action state. This is the state where you put in the work, but sometimes you can't step into the next step. You can't grow until you've had that touch with the divination. So that's why you need to cycle through them both. Okay? Another thing that kind of gets me with this is like, for neurodivergent people, they don't have the energy. Like, yes, they also suck at planning sometimes. This is me talking about me. They suck at planning sometimes and executing things, but also a lot of times, because they're neurodivergent, they don't have the energy, right? They don't have the capacity to like, okay, let me do something every single day. Not even on the like, okay, let me plan. This is like, I don't have the energy. I'm tired. I'm exhausted, which is fair, which is valid. We all get exhausted. We all get drained from time to time. So a lot of people say that there are certain things that you have to do every day, whether it's in spirituality or in witchcraft. If it's in witchcraft, depending on what you do, it's like, okay, you have to pull a tarot card every day. Or if it's spirituality, you have to like meditate every day, whatever. You don't have to do those things every day. There's nothing that you have to do every day. Okay. And I feel like this need to try and do those things every day just further exhausts you, just further drains you, you know? So if you're having one of those days where it's like, I just don't have the energy, that's okay. It doesn't make you any less spiritual. It doesn't make you any less of a witch. Take a day, okay? And when you have more energy, then do those things. Because trying to force yourself to do something when you don't have the energy, when you're not in the mood, it's not going to go the way you want it to go. Okay? It's just going to put you in a bad headspace. It's just going to put you in a bad mood. It's just going to further exhaust you. And you're going to end up drained and burnt out. And we don't want people to be drained and burnt out. That's not the goal. The goal is to have yourself feel a sort of peace, to feel a sort of comfort, to have life make more sense to you, you know, to work through issues, to work through problems, to feel competent. So that's what the goal is. So if you're not feeling it, if you need a break, take a break. That's always great. I'm a fan of breaks. I also think something that is interesting in spirituality or witchcraft, whichever one, is this need to have the most expensive things, to have like the latest and the greatest. Because there are lots of tools that are super expensive, you know, and you don't need, because there are lots of tools that are super expensive, you know, and you don't need the fancy schmancy tools, okay? You don't need like the fancy schmancy cup, you don't need the fanciest altar cloth or to buy some super fancy candles. Okay, you can get candles at the dollar store. That's where I get my candles from, the dollar store. And they work perfectly fine for me. All right, you can get the tiny little tea light candles and they work amazing. They work great. And a lot of crystals are also super expensive. You don't need the most expensive crystals, right? You just don't need it. I feel like some of the best things are the things that you can find in your neighborhood, like going on a walk and being like, oh, I found this tree branch and it just gave me these very wholesome vibes. That's perfectly fine. I have tree branches, rocks that I'm like, and this is now my rock. This is now my thing that I've incorporated into my practice because I found it and it just gave me a really nice vibe, you know? You don't always have to go to the store and buy the most latest and greatest. And that doesn't technically have to do anything with neurodivergency, except for the fact that a lot of neurodivergent people just tend to hoard things. They're like, I need it. It's a problem, which is why a lot of tarot readers end up having like 30 to 50 decks and only using like 3 of them. It's because it's mostly because they see it and they're like, I want it, give it to me now, type vibes. And that's more on impulse control and like those types of things. But I just wanted to put that out there. You don't need the latest and the greatest. It's okay to just go simple and like finding something in your neighborhood or outside in your backyard and being like, this is going to be great, right? Because sometimes those are the most powerful tools, especially if you're like doing protection spells for your house. Using something that actually is around your house is going to amplify that like 20 times, okay? So, and then grounding things, like I'm a fan of using rocks and leaves and sticks for grounding because it's part of nature and nature, it is inherently grounding. And I just think it's so great. So that's my little caveat to that. Okay? Something that concerns me with spirituality. Like how there's the need to like, okay, neurodivergency is bad, being outside of the norm is bad. You have to do things a said way. There's also another thing where you kind of like glorify neurodivergency in a way, or just like sicknesses in a way. Like, because there are people who are schizophrenic, right? And in those cases, they need help, right? Like, we don't want to glorify that and be like, oh, okay, if you're seeing things, then that means you're psychic. Then that means you've opened your third eye. While it can mean that, it's a very slippery slope. It's a very thin line that's very fluctuating to go from psychosis to, okay, no, this is something that's spiritually related. Okay. And knowing the difference is so important, and making sure that you're doing well mentally, emotionally, and physically always comes first. Always, always, always. I don't care what's happening. You always have to make sure that mentally, physically, emotionally, you are doing okay, right? That needs to be the basis of anything you do. Like, before you do anything, let me check in on myself. How am I doing mentally, physically, and emotionally? And then if those things are good, then we go into the next step of like, okay, but what's next? What's happening here? What is this, a spiritual problem? Glorifying that can be incredibly dangerous, right? Telling someone who has schizophrenia that it's like, oh no, you're just seeing visions, you're just psychic. Some of the things that people who have schizophrenia see are incredibly dangerous. They're incredibly harmful. And it could lead to them harming themselves or others, which is why we need to rule out those things before we're like, no, this is just a spiritual thing. You've just opened your third eye. We need to make sure that, okay, have we taken care of the basics? Are you sure this isn't something else before we diagnose it as this? And we're not trained. Like, every normal day people aren't trained to do that, right? That's something that we should probably seek professional help for in that case. And if there are things, if you see things that are constantly telling you bad things, that's like, oh, you should hurt yourself, that brings you like fear, that scares you, I would be worried about that, because then that might not be opening your third eye. That might not be, okay, this is just messages from my spirit guides or ancestors. It could be something else. So that's just something that we need to make sure that we are very aware of, because things like that can be incredibly harmful and incredibly dangerous. And I would never want someone to put themselves in a harmful or dangerous situation. Something that you should probably be aware of is, because neurodivergent people's brains work a little bit differently, sometimes they're more prone to negative energy. In my personal opinion, the moment you get into spirituality, the moment you get into witchcraft, you're more prone and sensitive to negative energy. And the reason why is because you're more aware of it, right? Like, when you're not into that, you're not aware of it. It's not that it's not that it's more around you. It's not that you're attracting it. It's just that you're aware of it. You're aware of, oh, this is negative energy. This is energy that is bringing me down. That's affecting me mentally. That's affecting me emotionally, and because you're more aware of it, it affects you just a little bit more. So it's not even a prone thing. It's just an awareness thing. And so then you have to be like, okay, now I have to spend extra time making sure I'm okay, making sure that I have protections up, making sure that I'm taking care of me, because you're more aware of what is causing you to be depleted, what is causing you to be in this negative headspace, what is preventing you from accomplishing your dreams, your goals, your manifestations, those types of things. And because of that awareness, you have to do something about it, because if you don't do something about it, you're going to end up in a state where you're depressed or you're not feeling the best. So that's something that needs to be kept in mind when you get into spirituality. And I feel like that's not even a neurodivergent thing. That's just when you enter the craft, when you start to become spiritual, it's something that happens. Something that annoys me about neurodivergency, because I'm not neurotypical, I'm neurodivergent, is it's time blindness. Okay, I will consistently forget what day it is, what hour it is, like what moon phase it is. Like, I'm constantly lost in the sauce. If you've been in any of my lives, I'll be like, oops, my bad, I was lost in the sauce. And it's because I was. All right, I was in the sauce, swimming around, dipping and diving, because it happens. I get lost in the sauce, and more than likely neurodivergent people are going to get lost in the sauce, which is why it's so hard to keep up with any events ever, right? Like the moon phases, the new moon, the full moon, the crescent moon, the waning, the waxing, whatever. It's hard to keep up with that because we're consistently forgetting about time. We're like, oh, forgot time existed, forgot that was a thing. You know, like in our head, we know that this is something that happens on this day, but we'll forget about the days. We'll be like, oh my God, crazy. I was zoned out for like 5 days and I zoned back in, and all of a sudden the new moon was 2 days ago, you know? And it happens to the best of us, which is why it's so hard to like plan things out, to do things on specific moon days. Sometimes there are people who are like, okay, and on every new moon, you're supposed to like set your intentions, cleanse, make moon water. And for neurodivergent people, that can be really hard. That can be really frustrating. And my thing that I want to say about that is okay. If you zone out and you zone out for 5 days and you're like, oh wow, missed the new moon, missed the full moon, it's okay. You don't have to do something for every moon phase. You don't have to do something for every astrological event, for every eclipse that happens, because it happens to the best of us. I've missed several eclipses where I was like, oh man, I really wanted to do something for that one. Maybe I'll get it next time. You know? And the thing about moon phases is you have 3 days, right? You have the day before, the day of, and the day after to try and do something. So if you zone back in on one of those days, you can get it in the nick of time, right? You can be like, I got it. I'm here. You know, showing up last minute, but you could still do it something. For eclipses, I don't know about that. I don't know much about eclipses, so I can't give you the best information about eclipses. But it's okay to not do something for every astrological event. You know, it's okay to do something whenever you remember. You're like, oh, I'm supposed to do this on this day? Well, now that you've remembered it, why don't you do it now? Why don't you just be like, okay, I'm here in this moment. I've remembered in this moment. I have the energy in this moment. Do it now. It's okay. It doesn't have to be on said day at said time during said day of the week. You know? Whenever you have the energy, whenever you're the most zoned in and focused, that's the perfect time to do it. And that is my personal opinion. Take that as you will. That is just me. I think also a lot of neurodivergent people feel like an imposter in their practice, in their craft. And it's because of all of the things that I've just named. The time blindness, not being able to like do things on certain moon phases, on certain moon days, not being able to do certain things every day. You know, the meditation really kicks in where they're like, oh, obviously, because I can't meditate, I'm not spiritual, I'm not doing my practice right. And there's this huge imposter syndrome that comes in when trying to do this stuff. And it's because you put so much pressure on yourself, right? It's because you're like, it has to be this way. And if it's not this way, then I'm doing it wrong. Then I'm not correct. Then I'm just faking it. And what's I think is important to remember in these situations is if you're trying, if this is something that you're trying to do, if you're like, okay, well, I'm meditating whenever I can meditate, I'm doing the spells whenever I can do the spells, whenever I do remember that there's an astrological event, I do it, then that's good. That makes you perfectly okay. It doesn't make you any less of a witch or a practitioner or spiritual. You are enough, right? You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, okay? Just because you missed said things doesn't mean you're faking it, okay? That's never the case. And we all have to go through our own, like, processes of trying to validate ourselves and being like, no, I'm not an imposter. And it's hard to deal with because the imposter syndrome hits so hard sometimes. We're like, I'm obviously faking this. Obviously, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not doing what I need to do, so I'm not what I want to be, you know, and it's a really hard thing to deal with. And I wish I had better tips to deal with imposter syndrome. I just do my best to like be like, treat myself with love and kindness and understanding and be like, okay, it's okay if I miss this. It's okay if I'm not doing everything as perfect as I would like it to be. I think that's one of the best things to deal with imposter syndrome is to be kind, to show yourself patience, to show yourself acceptance and understanding. Because I think a lot of times we forget that self-love and self-care needs to happen. We don't have to be our own worst enemy and criticize ourselves, because we do criticize ourselves the hardest, and it sucks because no one will ever really be as big of a bully to ourselves as ourselves, right? We are our biggest bullies sometimes. And so I think the best thing to do is self-love, self-acceptance, and just patience, honestly, when dealing with imposter syndrome. I think something that also gives people imposter syndrome in the craft, in the practice, is neurodivergent people have this bad habit of wanting to understand everything before they do anything, right? So what happens is they spend an excessive amount of time researching. They spend an excessive amount of time learning. And I love to learn, right? I love to read, learn new things, but it's a thing that I see a whole bunch in tarot too, where they're like, no, I need to learn all of the cards. I need to figure out all the meanings before I ever do any tarot spreads. And I feel like feeling like you need to know everything holds you back from just jumping in, right? There are some people who are like, no, I need to know everything about said practice, said religion before I do anything. It's okay to learn and do at the same time. And you don't even have to do anything super elaborate. It can be something small, like you're like, okay, I need to learn everything about spells before I do a spell. You can do the most simplest spell. You can get you a tea light candle, right? You could carve something in it and be like protection, and there it is, protection candle. That's it. Carve it in with a pen, because that's what I do sometimes, and light it, and there you go. That's your first spell ever. You can do manifestation. Some of the easiest manifestations is writing things down several times. I think our need and want to learn sometimes holds us back, and we forget the actual action of it all. And if we stay too long in being like, well, I just need to learn, we'll never do anything, you know? And so I think it's important for us to remember that, hey, it's important to do things, to all right, let me stop learning for a minute and let me test this one out. Let me try and do it myself. Let me put some action into it. And it'll help a little bit with that imposter syndrome. It'll help you feel more like, okay, no, I'm doing this. I'm not just faking it. So that's some advice that I have with that. And I hear a lot of people struggle with that, not just me. That's what I hear. It could be just me. So let me know if I'm wrong. Basically, just to end this little topic here, the main thing is that I would like to share with you guys is there is no right or wrong way to do anything. So no matter what way you do anything, it's going to be right, because there is no wrong way. And I feel like sometimes we get stuck in this, I want to make sure I'm doing everything right. I want to make sure I'm doing everything perfect. There is no wrong way. You can't mess up. You're automatically doing it right, because there's so many different ways to do everything that there is literally no wrong way. Sometimes things don't work out the way you want them to. Sometimes things don't have the desired effect that you wanted them to, but that just means you got to rework it. That just means you have to try again, try it again, but slightly different. And that's what that is. But there is no real wrong way to do anything. So you're automatically right just by trying, just by doing. And I love that. So anyways, that's it for my topic of neurodivergency in witchcraft. Now it is time to get to the questions portion of it all. And I want to thank everyone who gave me a question, because that really helps. So let's get down to the questions of it all. The first question that I have here is, what are witches known? What are witches known for? And number one, I think this question was asked by someone who doesn't know much about witchcraft. And that is perfect. I love that, right? Because the thing about this is there's a stereotypical thought about witches. And that stereotypical thought about witches is what you see in movies. It's the whole movie of it all, where it's like they have the nose and they have the hat and they have the wands, and then there's this whole thing about like good and bad witches, and there are no good and bad witches, right? It's all about your intentions, right? Your intentions can be bad, your intentions could be good, but sometimes even with those intentions, things can still work out pretty positive, you know? So there is no real thing as like, oh, you're a good witch, oh, you're a bad witch. There are some people who practice hexes, who do curses, but even those can be used for good, you know? Just like there are some bad people who do good things and there are good people who do bad things, it's really hard to categorize things into these two boxes that like it fits perfectly. Okay? Things are always on a spectrum, and it's like, okay, you can do things that are good, you can do things that are bad, you can accidentally do things that are good when you mean to do something that's bad, and you can accidentally do something that's bad when you do something that's good. So it's all a spectrum, but when people think about witches, that's what they think of. They think of the fancy schmancy movies of it all, where it's like, yes, we have our big pot, we have our big cauldron, and we're cooking kids, and we're putting spells on people, and we're doing these death spells or whatever. That's what the media shows, and that's not actually what witches are. That's not actually how any of that goes. Okay, don't get me wrong. If you see someone who's like, okay, they're a witch, and they like have a cool looking hat, and they dress the part, it's for aesthetics. It's because that's something that makes them happy, and not because that's something that you have to do in order to be a witch. Okay, like there are green witches, and you'll see them dressed in the florals and the leaves, and like it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and I love it. It's not necessary. It's not a you have to do this, right? And then there are so many different types of witches that there's just no one thing that any witch does ever, because there are so many different types. There are so many different practices. There are so many different beliefs. And so it's really hard to pinpoint like, okay, what do witches do? Everything. They do everything. Anything and everything you can think of. They're just like normal people. They just add intention. They just add magic to their lives. And that's what that is. And that's why I love this question, because I know it was asked by someone who doesn't exactly know. And it gives me the chance to explain that it's a lot more complicated and complex than you might originally think. And I love that. Anyways, great question. Next question. What is the biggest mistake when reading tarot? And in my personal opinion, you might meet someone who says something different. In my personal opinion, the biggest mistake when reading tarot is not trusting your intuition. It happens so often where we're not too sure about our intuition. We're not trusting ourselves. We're not believing in ourselves. And the tarot cards are right, right? They're right, but because we second guess ourselves, and because we're like, I don't know, we end up being wrong. And it's that second guessing that really is the downfall of it all. My biggest thing, my biggest advice that I can tell you when you're starting to read tarot is have confidence. I don't even care if you're 100% wrong. Have confidence, because that confidence will take you places. That confidence will allow you to learn more, to grow more, and you'll be able to learn from your mistakes. You can be like, okay, this was wrong, but what I said about this was right. And you can be like, okay, what drove me to those conclusions? Where did I get those answers from? Instead of being like, well, I don't know, and that fear of being wrong will hold you back. So trust yourself. Whatever your first instinct is, whatever your intuition tells you, trust it. Go for it. Just shoot for the stars, is my opinion. Because that is the biggest mistake that I see every single time, is that you didn't trust yourself, that you didn't listen to your intuition, that you didn't listen to your spirit guides when they told you what was happening to you, and you were like, no, 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 I'm just crazy, I'm just insane, I obviously misread that situation, And they were sitting there like, bitch, didn't I tell you exactly what I told you? So, and that's that's how I feel about that. Okay. Anyways, next question is, how do you become a witch? And I love this question because there is no way, like no real, there's not like an initiation. There's not a certain thing you have to do. If you want to be a witch, go for it. That's it. That's basically all of it, right? You're like, you know what? If you wake up one day and you're like, you know what? I want to be a witch. Boom. That's it. That's all it is. Because it's really just a title, right? And so if you're like, I want to be a witch, and then you're like, okay, well, let me look into things that witches do. Like, what is the practice? What is the thing? You know? And then you just align yourself with that. That's fine. That's how it is. The only time where it's like you would have to do an initiation or there are certain things that you have to do is if you become a part of a specific religion or practice. Like hoodoo, voodoo, brujeria. If you join a coven, there are rules, you're right, but that's not specifically witch. Those are practices. Those are specific belief systems that you want to be in and not necessarily just which is a very broad thing. So that's the only time when you would have to be like, oh, I have to do something in order to be a part of this. If you want to be a witch, you could wake up today. You could see this video right now and be like, you know what, I want to be a witch. Boom, there you are. You've done it. You've just completed all tasks that you needed to do to be a witch. And that's it. You know? And then after that time, you could be like, and I'm a witch and all I do is meditate. That's great. That's beautiful. That's amazing. You've checked all of the boxes. There's nothing else that you need to do unless you decide there's something else that you want to do. And that's one of the things that I love about witchcraft and spirituality is it's all about who do you want to be, what makes you happy, and what do you want to do? So that's a great question. And the last question that we have here today, which I could argue is the most important question that I've been asked today is, are you feeling bonita? And my answer to this question is absolutely. Okay? Always got to feel bonita. And a follow-up question is, are you feeling bonita? Anyways, thank you for all of the questions. Thank you for watching. I hope everyone has a beautiful, amazing rest of your day. And it's going to be Friday when this video drops. So enjoy your weekend and leave questions for the next video. So this has been great. This has been fun. If you have any questions, you know what to do.